says there are basically 6 ways of attacking it, or describes 6 ways of attacking the problem. The post is absolutely full of clever perspectives, insightful observations, and clever ideas. Basically, if you're a mathematician, or for that matter a physicist, which is my background, it's like having a chat with an absolutely outstanding mathematician who's willing to share their best thinking with you. This is, it's not a typical boing boing post, to put it mildly. After the end of the post, there are then 89 comments. Actually, there were 89 comments when I last counted. I think they're now up to more like 120. And there are a whole bunch of sort of top-notch mathematicians in their own right chiming in, batting ideas backwards and forwards, and sharing insights of their own. The conversation also spread out to other mathematical blogs. That's one blog post. Okay, I've gone on at some length about this. The reason why is I want to give you some idea of sort of how overwhelming it is. There's a lot of these posts. There are 118, not all of such high quality, of course. There's a famous instance a few years ago you might have heard about this Russian mathematician, Grisha Perelman. He won, it's a famous recluse. He proved a century-old conjecture due to Poincare. It's incredibly difficult, this proof of his, and he didn't really publish a full proof. But Tao, on his blog, through 19 separate posts, gave an outline proof of the Poincare conjecture following this up. Okay, that's one person. Tim Gowers is another Fields medalist at Cambridge University. Funnily enough, he also runs a blog, and he's got all sorts of interesting posts on his blog. We have Elaine Kahn, another Fields medalist. He also runs a blog. We have Richard Borcherds, another Fields medalist at Berkeley. Well, he runs a blog, but like so many bloggers, he got sick of it, and this is the last post. It's from January 2008. So that's kind of too bad. Anyway, the basic point here is that of the 42 living Fields medalists, roughly 10% of them have blogs. So a few years ago, this was something that scientists were not interested in as a general rule, embarrassingly in my opinion, because people have been using these, online media of all kinds very effectively for years. I've concentrated on Fields medalists, I guess, just because they're the best, and I wanted to sort of give you some insight into how things are at the top there. It's obviously spreading, but of course there are many other blogs. So from a scientist's point of view, not sort of a general point of view, blogging has many interesting characteristics. It's informal, it's rapid fire, and in particular it's a way of sharing insights that would be very difficult to publish in a conventional way. So you can take sort of the small but striking ideas that you have as a scientist, the sort of stuff that you can't publish in a conventional sort of a form, or thoughts on general approach to a problem. These things are too small to be published, but very often that's really that's the key point. A friend of mine once commented that basically what a paper is you sit there in the cafe, you have a really clever idea at some point on the back of an envelope, you translate that into a 40-page paper, it's disseminated around the world. Other people take the paper to the cafe, they read it, and if they're lucky, eventually they figure out what was on the envelope. And in some sense, this is sort of giving you more direct access to the envelope, so to speak. It's also, more importantly, because you can publish these small insights that contain the seeds of later progress. I mean, that's very important. This fact that there are all these people participating in this conversation who ordinarily would not be, it's a way, in a sense, of scaling up scientific conversation so it becomes widely distributed both in space and also, in some ways more importantly, in time. So that the kind of conversation that usually takes place inside sort of the hallway or the lecture room or the classroom instead starts to spread out so that it's taking place all over the world. And not only is it broadcast, but of course people can contribute their best insights back. It's also really critically a difference from conversation is that it's making scientific conversation searchable. Those of you who run blogs probably, like myself, have a tendency to Google yourself for something that you kind of half remember but don't quite. But here, it's really critical to be able to go back to some of these insights and find where people said what. If you Google Navier-Stokes problem, you discover that Tao's post is the third hit, or depending on where exactly you Google from in the world. So it makes it very easy for future mathematicians to benefit from it. A curmudgeon might say, shouldn't the best papers be at the top of the Google rankings? And they kind of have a point, but really if Google is doing its job, then the ranking should reflect the significance of the item, regardless of what format it is. It doesn't matter whether it's paper, a blog post, or some other form, and certainly this blog post is an awful lot more useful than most papers on the subject. So I think it sort of deserves its ranking. From a scientist's point of view, a good conversation with an insightful colleague is certainly worth more often than reading even the best of the papers. So as search engines, I think the right thing to say is that as search engines become better personalized, search results should better reflect your interests, and so you should, if you need to see it third, you'll see it third, and if you're the kind of person who needs to see it 20th, you'll see it 20th. So I've talked a lot about Tao's blog in particular. I guess I've been reading and some blogs for more than 10 years, I guess, or so. Something that really drove home to me, though, was the fact that we tend to think of blogging as a fairly fixed medium, not completely fixed, of course. But what he's doing was, and all of these people, they're expanding the range of the blog medium simply through their own creative insight. They're not adding to the tools. They're simply thinking of new things which could do. Nobody realized that you could sort of essentially start your own amazing journal in this kind of way before he started to do this in 2007. They're just taking existing tools and using them in new ways. It's also interesting, of course, to talk about adding new capabilities to the existing tools. Actually, a critical fact, and a really interesting fact, is that a developer at WordPress.com, Michael Adams, in 2007, added the ability to do LaTeX on WordPress, basically as a joke. He says in his blog post announcing it, I'm sure that sort of me and 3 others will be interested in this. And yet it's enabled this explosion. So something that he did apparently as a sort of a very minor thing has really had a big impact. There are many other things that could easily be added to these tools which aren't yet there. Basically, these dots here, that's another talk. Well, actually, it's several more talks about things that would be interesting to do, which I'm not going to talk about. So I've started with blogs. I want to talk about some other things. I mean, that's a very familiar kind of a thing. I've started with the familiar. In particular, I want to talk a little bit about open source biology and the Registry of Standard Biological Parts. How many people are familiar with open source biology? Okay. All right. So what the Registry of Standard Biological Parts is basically it's SourceForge for biology, or GitHub, or whatever your favorite place is. The reason, or the sense in which that's true, is that if you want to specify a living being, the way you do it is by specifying, in some sense, the DNA sequence, right? And that's digital. And so you can sequence your organism, and you can upload the sequence to an online repository and share it.